Let's learn some Torah. It's a double portion this week, Chukat Balak, and so far we've been looking at Chukat. Let's look a little bit at the Torah portion, Balak. The incredible power in Parshat Balak can be frightening when we understand it on its own textual level. Balak is the name of a king of a kingdom called Moab. And Balak is scared of the Israelites because as our ancestors travel and as other nations try to attack them, every nation falls before not the Israelites' military might, but in the face of God's blessing. It's a complicated worldview. Let's not analyze that part of it for now, but let's begin with the king of Moab's fear, with Balak's fear that the Israelites were coming close to his territory. So he knows that the military will not be a successful defense of his kingdom. But he thinks, and so does the text, interestingly enough, that having a prophet on his side will make a difference. Now, remember, I just said the text affirms this. Balak tries to hire a prophet, a non-Israelite prophet named Bilam. You might know this story. We often tell the story because there's a talking donkey in the story. In my book that I created this year called The Impossible Torah, the complete AI Torah commentary, I had the talking donkey from this week's Parsha write a comment on this week's Parsha. It was a fascinating thing. And then, by the way, I had the donkey from Shrek, another talking donkey, write a comment about the talking donkey in the Torah. The way that this became very meta very quickly was fun. But let's look for a second at Bilam the prophet, because the Torah describes him as a prophet. You might assume that the kind of monotheism that Judaism today affirms, that there is but one God, and forms of Judaism believe that Judaism is the only path toward that God. That's not, I think, the way that giants of Torah believe. Giants of Torah, like Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, taught that there were multiple ways up the mountain. Non-Jewish scholars talk about the versatile masks of God. And spiritualists will say that God is infinite and there are infinite possible avenues into that source of existence. Bilam is described in the Torah as a prophet, and when the king Balak hires him to curse the Israelites so that then the king's military would be able to attack the Israelites, Bilam first says, I can't do anything that God doesn't put into my mouth. I can't say anything that God doesn't put into my mouth. That shows the sincerity of his relationship with God. Not his God, but God. And in fact, when the king's emissaries travel to try to solicit the prophet's help, he has them stay. He has a dream. God speaks to him in a dream and says, don't go. And then the king's emissaries offer him more money. And he asks God in the dream, may I go? And God says to Bilam, go, but you will only be able to say what I put in your mouth. And Bilam goes. And among the strange parts of the story is this talking donkey. Bilam, along the way, riding on his donkey, is confronted, and he can't see it, by an angel standing in the way with a flaming sword. And the donkey moves to one side, the other side, crashing Bilam's leg into the rocks to the side, and Bilam gets very angry, and he yells at his donkey, what are you doing? And the donkey says, because God opens up the donkey's mouth, what are you doing? I've been a faithful donkey to you. Don't you see this danger in front of us? And then Bilam was able to see the angel in front of them. Now, this is a very strange story, to be sure. But one of the lessons to be learned is that, number one, the Torah understands that there are non-Israelite ways to access God. Let me say that in a modern context. Judaism affirms that Judaism does not have the exclusive claim to a relationship with God. Isn't that powerful to remember? That in the interfaith work that many of us do, we aren't in any way presuming that we have truth and they do not. Among the deepest gifts of Jewish tradition is that we are not dogmatic, nor do we think we have a monopoly on the holy. We learn together, we grow together. God's voice speaks in infinite ways. And here we are, God's children trying to make it work in a created world that is often very shaky and in dire need of harmony. So the first message for today is Judaism doesn't have exclusive claim to God's love. Thank God, because there is more than enough love for all of God's children, and more than enough depth for God that we can access differently. Our disagreements should be seen as refractions of a unified truth. What a gift. What a gift it is to be in relationship with the divine and to know that my neighbor, though different from me, is also in relationship with the divine. We can be gentle with each other, love each other, respect each other's symbolic language. I was at church just 2 weeks ago with Father Kevin Weidinger. You might remember him. He and I have broadcasted twice so far as part of our 9 o'clock experience, once in Selma, Alabama, and once from my home. And among the things that I cherish so much is being able to sit in his church and recognize the parts of his service to which I can say Amen, the recitation of Psalms, for instance, and the parts of his service that I cannot recite, where the uniqueness of his relationship with God doesn't work in my language map. But I know that deeper than the words we utter and the differences that identify us, we are talking to the same God with a heart that is absolutely unified. Okay, that was message 1. How about message 2? The Torah takes seriously the impact of a prophet's words. If Balaam were able, according to rabbinic tradition, in the moment, in a heref ayin, in a blink of an eye, to curse the people that he was hired to curse, how powerful his words would have been and how dangerous his words would have been. When Balaam goes up on the mountain overlooking the Israelites, he does prepare to curse the Israelites the way he was hired to do. Despite all of his protests, he still was trying to do it. And the Torah doesn't say that he didn't have the power. The Torah recognizes that he's a prophet and that what he could do would be dangerous to the people. So what he does is he prepares to curse, and God interrupts and places in his mouth blessing. Balaam says, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. You might know we say these words when we walk into synagogues. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. The way we understand our sacred space is based in the language of a non-Israelite prophet. What a gorgeous thing it is to know that when I worship, as a Jew, some of my language came from outside of my community. Some of my melody comes from outside of my community. So the first message is I don't have the exclusive claim to God. Number 2 is sometimes learning from other faith traditions, integrating it into Jewish modes of worship, makes us even richer as a tradition. One last message. It's been noted by some commentators that in the writing of a Torah scroll, there are often breaks. Stuma and ptucha. A stuma is a kind of break in a line where there are words here and words here, and a break in the middle. It's a beautiful kind of calligraphy. There's also a ptucha, where let's say this is a line, and then this is a break, and then you've got the column break. And so the ptucha, the open break, opens into the larger margin, and the stuma is surrounded by words. Those breaks are part of what makes Torah scrolls very beautiful to look at. But if you look at the Torah portion that includes all of Balak, all of the story of Balaam, there is not one break. And it was suggested by the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Kagan, of the late 1800s, early 1900s, known as the Chafetz Chaim, that the lack of a break in the sequencing of the words makes it a different kind of communication from God that we are witnessing. In the prophetic language that is associated with Moshe, with Moses, there are breaks. But with Bilam, there are no breaks. And the Chafetz Chaim suggested beautifully that Bilam's prophecy was a torrential downpour of the divine. God didn't give Bilam any space to breathe and process, or Bilam didn't take any space to breathe and process. Moshe and other Israelite prophets, at least in our tradition, received the word of God, spoke with God, and there were pauses. Those pauses are incredibly important because that's where human agency is demonstrated, where we have space even in an intense encounter with God. We have space to be the individual souls we are. I don't dissolve in communion with the divine. I show up as a differentiated self. And that is a Jewish way of showing up in relationship with God. Myself matters in Jewish tradition. Yourself matters in Jewish tradition. And along the lines of the first two messages, that we don't have the exclusive claim to God, and that we can be richer as a Jewish tradition, letting in beautiful truths and gifts from others, is also the third point with which we'll close for now, which is you matter. In relationship with God, we are not absorbed, we don't disappear, we don't cease being ourselves. The image of God is refracted in gorgeous, infinite ways, and you are one. And you matter. In conversation with another, letting in some truths doesn't erase the boundary of selfhood. And we should be proud of being created in the image of God, and we must, along the lines of the first message, remember that we are not alone in being created in the image of God. Just like Judaism isn't the monopoly, isn't the only way of accessing God, so too I am not the only way of being a beautiful refraction of God's image. Everyone is. So may we be blessed, friends, by a beautiful encounter with somebody today. And maybe in the back of our minds, or maybe at the tip of our tongues, an appreciation of their beautiful individuality. Maybe even a willingness to learn from them. Maybe even, if we get this right, we won't suddenly become the same, but we will know that we're sisters and brothers, and maybe we'll even act together like sisters and brothers. Let's go, friends. Let's have a good day. Let's meet somebody new. Bless you, friends. See you tomorrow.